So the purpose of it today is taking you through the idea validation stage, which, by the way, a lot of people tend to ignore. And by ignoring it, they maximize their chances of failure. We tend to get excited by our ideas. We tend to go ahead and jump into things that we're not sure are actually valid. We sometimes have problems that we currently face and we think that everyone is facing, so we go ahead and develop a solution for it without actually knowing whether or not that's a problem for others. Then it's about going into other areas where the problems are clear to everyone, but then the product itself is not something that people want to buy, they don't want to use it, or it's been developed in a way that's not kind of fit with the market and what their demands are. What I've based this is on a book that I read last year, which was perfect timing for me because that's when I started my second startup. And it's basically a book called The Right It. I encourage everyone who could get a hand on this book to read it. It's written by Alberto Savio, who is basically the former director of engineering and innovation at Google. And he describes himself as a doctor of philosophy. So he's been through his own share of failures and he developed this methodology of how to create an idea validation that will take things forward without having to go through the pains of development, costs a lot of money and time, and then end up in failure. So most of this is based on his track. So one thing he says in the beginning of the book is that most ideas will fail in the market, even if competently executed. Meaning, even if you're the best at what you do and you've developed the best product, even if you have a great marketing, even if you develop something that is, you know, needed from your perspective, most of those ideas will actually fail in the market. Now, the question is always, why do most ideas fail? And one thing you should know is 80% of them actually do. And this is a recent study that's been done on all new ideas in the market coming in. 80% of them actually fail within the first 2 years of launching. Now, failure can be due to a lot of things. And one of the main things that failure is due to is obviously timing, and research has been done about that. You've all probably heard about YouTube and its amazing success. YouTube was actually not the first streaming service online or video hosting service. There were those before them, but the timing was wrong. And obviously then the execution, and that led to the failure. And failure is basically either due to launch, so how you launch your product, how you developed it, how you marketed it, how you sold it. That's one reason, and you have a lot of businesses that fail in that respect. Operations, meaning how you actually run it. Is it a buggy application, if you've developed an application or so forth? Yeah, so in terms of the premise, it's basically what we mean by the idea. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that actually out of the 80% failures, almost 80% of those are due to the idea and the premise being wrong. And this is what we want to tackle today. One of the things, obviously, and if we look at both first reasons, launch and operations, this is something that obviously, if you look at the best companies in the world, and let's bring up Google, for example. Google obviously is one of the best companies when it comes to marketing their products, building their products, selling their products, and the brand, of course, to back it up. And they have the best people in the world developing those products. But I would want you to go to this website and it's basically what they call the Google graveyard. It has all the products that were launched by Google and services as well, and it currently lists 204 products and services that were killed by Google, meaning products that were launched in the market but failed, some of them miserably. Google Glasses would be one of them. You probably heard of Google Waves. I don't know if anyone has heard of Google Waves, but that was something that was supposed to replace emails. That, of course, didn't go ahead and it was killed. And you can see a lot more there. So when we get into the first step, and we know this very well, and I always get these from people that are visit me either in the office or even us. We tend to develop an idea in our mind based on a problem that we think is worth solving. And then the first thing we do, and I'm pretty sure some of you maybe have done this, I have done this before, is what? Ask for opinions, right? So opinions usually end up being just opinions, right? Some people will tell you it's an amazing product, you should definitely go ahead and do it, and everyone will use it. Other people will put you down and tell you, no, why do we need this? Why do you think this is something that will work? It will never work. And you'll get those kind of feedbacks. And these are from friends, from family, and other people around you. But then you end up basically with two separate things. One, you could get opinions that turn out to be false positives. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of Microsoft Zune. Now, I won't put out the question to the floor now, but Microsoft Zune was supposed to be the competitor to the iPod from Apple. Now, that flopped miserably. They already thought everyone was using an iPod. The iPod worked, right? Everyone loved the iPod. So why not launch our own and everyone will fall in love with it as well? But that turned out to be a false positive, and we'll see why now. Google Waves was another product. So Google Waves, again, was supposed to replace emails. They thought everyone would love it. They asked people, people actually said they loved it. But then when they launched it, the market didn't accept it as a replacement for emails. But another thing that I was actually guilty of was a false negative, which was the opposite of flops, like the Zune and Google Wave, which was Airbnb. When Airbnb first launched, I thought completely it would fail. I would not go book a room in someone else's house in another country to stay in. No one would do that, especially with strangers, and it would definitely not work. Now, that I turned out to be completely wrong. And if they had asked me before they launched, obviously these are the responses. And by the way, most people didn't think that Airbnb would actually work, but that turned out to be a false negative. The opinion was it would never work, and it turned out to work. So what is the differentiator here? If you are working with opinions, then that you should take them as just that, opinions. What you should work with is data, and not anyone else's data, but your own data. So the first step is, if you have an idea, then you should look at data that you have gathered, right? A lot of people, what they do is when they have an idea, they say, yeah, sure, let me build another talabat. Okay, if you build another talabat, then sure, the data is there because a lot of people use talabat. So you can say it's obviously a great idea. You can look at countries and you say, well, talabat is on a lot of countries. The same model is implemented almost across the world. So obviously it's a great idea. In terms of timing, it's again, people these days are using it a lot, so it must be a great idea. And all these other things. But the problem is that is not data that you have gathered. This is data that Talabat has gathered. Talabat has that data. They have done their homework. What you should do is, whenever you build an idea, is come ahead and try to gather your own data. Not by asking people, do you like it or not? So if, let's say, I were to develop a product of any sort, or let's say food, right? You can say a lot of people like burgers, lovely. But if you have another idea for a burger, maybe go ahead and check if people will actually buy your burger. And that's why we usually advise people to, before even going ahead and developing your burger and creating everything, try it out with some people. Gather your own data, look at the data from people around you, pitch them their idea, people next to you, people that you have access to, and then you have to ensure that those people have what has been now called skin in the game. And what do we mean by skin in the game? If someone gives you an opinion, then they don't have skin in the game because an opinion is free, right? I can give my opinion to anyone. What you should basically do is go ahead and try to sell it, for example, to people. If they're willing to buy, then that's data. Skin in the game would be in another way. Let's say, for example, someone is willing to give you their time. That's also skin in the game. They are willing to put in the time, and that means that they actually believe in your idea. If they are willing to commit something of any sort, then again, that's also another way. One thing, though, is there are certain tools and ways that you can get this, and we'll come to it later. But the whole premise of this is before you jump in, before you develop, the first thing you should do is make sure that people will commit to your product before you go ahead and develop it for them. We tend to ask this question a lot, right? As developers, as startups, we go and ask people, if we build this for you, or if we develop this for you, will you buy it? That's usually how we frame the question. But what if we reverse that question? What if we said, if you buy it from me, I'll build it for you? So we kind of flip it around. That verifies my idea. So even before I start building it, I ask people, buy it from me now, and I'll build it for you. Now, the problem is no one is going to buy something they can't see, right? So you have to develop the product at least. So how do I gather this data, right? What are basically, what is the method for this? And this is basically what I want to present to you today as a technique. I don't think anyone here is born pre-96. I'm pretty sure you're the smartphone generation, so I'm old enough to have seen the Palm. And I don't know if anyone has seen this, but this is basically the first attempt at having what you would call a touch screen on the phone. It was a diary, it was a to-do list, it was so on. No one obviously has seen this, but this was the final product, right? The Palm Pilot. It was developed by Palm company and released in '96. Had some traction, actually went ahead, and it was a precursor to what we have seen now. But before this was developed as a final product, a prototype was developed before it. And you can see the picture in the middle here. This is what we call a prototype, right? So you have a circuit board, you've developed it, you've put everything together, you've created your touch screen. It's still ugly. It doesn't really look great, but it is a prototype. It's a proof of concept. It's not even what we would call a minimum viable product here, because no one would actually carry a bare bone circuit board with them. But again, it basically proved the point that this could work, right? So what I am trying to introduce you to today is a phase that comes before prototyping, before you actually start building something. which is a prototype. A pretotype, different than a prototype over here, is the phase where you do your idea validation. So Jeff Hawkins was the CEO of Palm Company. What he did was he had this idea for handheld, touchscreen based diary, if you will, and organizer and so on. And he's like, well, would actually people hold it with them? Would they carry it with them? Would they use it? So what he did actually is this, what you see on the left, is actually made in wood. He created a wooden one, carved in the buttons as he saw them, and then started carrying it with him for weeks, testing how would it feel, how would it work, would I actually use it, can I use it? So if, let's say, I'm in a meeting and I want to take notes, if I want to do this and that. He then introduced it to people. So he never built it. He did this in one day, cost him nothing, and then started gathering his data. Yeah. So what is the difference here between a pretotype, which is basically the idea validation stage, and a prototype, right? Because we always think that prototyping is what we should do first. Prototyping always refers to answering the questions of, can you actually build what you're trying to build? Will it work as expected? Okay, how cheaply and how fast I can make it. So these are the answers that you actually get by prototyping something. But by pretotyping, which is the most important thing here that you need to solve for, it answers the questions of, would people be interested in my product? Will they use it as I am introducing them to? Will they continue to use it? Because it's not about just utilization once and trying it, it's about making people want to continue using it by not only making it easy to use, but also useful for them and problem solving. So these are the answers that you should go through. Now, if you go ahead and look at what the difference are between a pretotype and then building a project completely, so even turning it into a company, you start from taking a few minutes or hours and spending maybe tens to hundreds of dinars or dollars here, okay? Building a very small, to the point pretotype, which in itself is only for data gathering. You just want to prove whether or not, by the way, because you could get either answers here, whether or not what you're proposing and what you're offering is something that people want, something that people will use and will continue using it, right? It's not meant to be the final solution. It's not even meant to be the first solution to the problem. It's just telling them, this is what I'm going to offer you. Are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing to go ahead and work with me? And this is basically, at this point, considered an experiment. No one is going to get massively poorer by spending 10, 20 dinars validating their idea and spending maybe a few hours to a few days doing it, right? But imagine you spend months, which, by the way, we've seen. I have actually worked with startups that have spent tens of thousands of dinars in Bahrain building a great product, but as soon as they launched, they didn't have the same reaction from people that they had when they first thought about their idea. Now that's months or years sometimes spent, tens of thousands of dinars, and then you end up with a failure, which could then derail you from trying anything else. Whereas experiments, you can do experiments every other day if you wish until you reach the right one. Now, I don't know if there are any science majors here, but as soon as we say experiments, then obviously you need a hypothesis. If you want to start testing out the interest from people then what you're basically saying is, I need to put in a hypothesis, a set of assumptions, right? That I need to prove that it's either a false hypothesis or most likely a right one, right? So in this case, you can frame it as simple as this. And this is just me giving a very simple example. You're basically saying that X percentage of people, right, which is Y, so X percentage of Y will do Z, and Z is what you want to test. So let's take, for example, you've built a simple website that requires registration and is solving for a certain problem. And it's subscription based. I'm pretty sure most of you have seen these kind of websites. So what you would do is, this is just something that you've put in, even on paper, and this is the best thing to do, and always put things in numbers, because if it's not in numbers and it's not measurable, then again, it remains an opinion. The purpose of this is to gather data. So if, let's say, we say, my hypothesis here is that 10% of my website visitors will register and purchase an early bird subscription to my product, which is blah, 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 and you can describe it. Let's take it simpler than that and go with a business that you actually see every day. Let's say you are starting a new recipe for cupcakes. I don't have a sweet tooth, but let's bring cupcakes as an example. So you're trying this new recipe, you've baked these cupcakes, you can bake them in a couple of hours. And what you do is you say, let me put them online, let me test this out. And your hypothesis will be that 30%, 40% of my followers will actually purchase my cupcakes. Now, the good thing about that is you could actually do that even before you start baking the cupcakes. So people can then start purchasing from you. Then you can bake the cupcakes, gather the feedback from those people. Would you buy again? Right? Because they bought the first time. And then based on that, you have concrete data. You can say that, yes, I've had so many people that actually put the money in. They are willing to pay for this. And then go ahead. Now, the next step is, of course, you don't go from that to building a company straight ahead. That's not my intention here. The intention is that you validated the idea, right? This is a new type of cupcake, maybe using different type of ingredients that are different than other cupcakes. I don't know. Not a big cook myself. But at the very least, you identified something, people paid for it, and whenever people pay, by the way, that's all the validation you pretty much need, because they kind of put their money, right? Based on that, then you can say, yes, this is more likely to work, right? But let's say if it didn't, if you didn't get anyone buying it, if you got people who bought it, but then said, no, we wouldn't buy again, then at least you validated your idea. That's it, it's done. I'll give you actually a very nice example of a story I read. It was a few years ago. Not sure which country, I don't want to give you the wrong country, but someone wanted to sell used cars online, right? And in a country that people are not used to buying cars online in general, so it's a new idea. Finding second-hand cars is not really something that was easily done in that country. So what the person did was he went to second-hand dealerships, found a few cars, took some pictures, went and put them online, created a very simple website with almost no effort within an hour, put them online and said, these are used cars. And he asked people to put in a $100 deposit. And see, this is the thing, this is the key. ask people to put in a $100 deposit if they want to buy this car. Now, within a few hours, sold 4 cars in that. Now, of course, he didn't own the cars, so he had to go to dealerships, get the cars, and then based on that, deliver them. But basically, what he achieved here was what? People actually paying online to buy these cars, proved his hypothesis, and then based on that, he said, well, this is an idea now worth exploring, and then maybe create a product around it. And now they've gone to actually develop one of the biggest websites for sold cars in that country. So this is how you should think about it. Now, in terms of testing, of course, always narrow it down. So in our hypothesis, for example, here we said 10% of website visitors will register and purchase an early bird subscription. But then you are launching locally, you are doing this locally. So yes, think big, see how you can expand this idea further and further out from your locale. But at the end of the day, you need to think local. Meaning, if you're selling it, think of, okay, I'm selling something, let me think about only my area within Bahrain, so not the whole of Bahrain, maybe my area, or uh, family would not be a good thing because they might patronize you and just buy for the sake of it, but trying to test a wider kind of circle. But in terms of that, what you're trying to do here is minimize your time, the cost, and the distance, because some of your ideas might require delivery, might require you doing something or going somewhere, right? Minimize these three aspects so that you can then end up from end to end, from having your idea to getting the data that you need within a few days maximum. And if you get that, that's basically what tells you your idea is great or your idea is most likely to fail. And this basically is the last thing that I wanted to talk about here. But just to recap very quickly, right? The law of market failure here applies to everyone, and everyone will have to face this, right? If people are buying your product, you're most likely going to succeed. Then it comes to, of course, timing, your operations, how you execute and deliver the product, and how good your product is. Of course, all those are factors. But at the end of the day, if people are willing to buy your product, then at least you're on the path to success, let's say. The second thing, of course, make sure you're building the right it. And this is where it comes from the book here. Basically, if you have a good idea, but execute it horribly, then you're going to fail, right? But the problem is, if you have the wrong idea to start off with, but execute that wrong idea greatly and competently, and probably the best anyone could actually execute that idea, but it was the wrong idea to begin with because you have not validated your idea in the market, then you're also going to fail. The third point, of course, that we talked about, opinions are opinions. You can ask for opinions and you can, get advice and so on. But always keep in mind that those opinions remain opinions. Okay? Number 4 is always trust your own data. Don't do market research and get data about this and that. That might help you to maybe expand into other countries, maybe knowing a few things about your market, which is great. But when you want to validate your idea, it should depend on your own data. You collect this data. And how do we collect it? We pretotype it. Pretotyping it meaning create a simple experiment, put the hypothesis on this experiment. What are you trying to test here or experiment with? And based on that, go gather the data and let the data tell you at the end of the day if this is a good idea or not. It's better than any opinion. So through that, I'm just going to take you through I have 2 minutes. I promised myself I'll take only 40, so you can have a lot more time for questions if anyone does. But just taking you through my startup, which now is still running, Springring. Springring is a school communication platform, right? And what we had done before that was work with schools, developing products for them, right, that they would use for school communication. So either their own apps or platforms or so on, through my digital agency. Now, and what we realized that people are willing to pay for that. Now, I'm not claiming that I actually did this on purpose. It was just something that did happen. But looking back at it now, that was basically our validation of the idea. People had actually paid us to develop a product that would facilitate school communication as a whole, right? Then what we did with that is we built a prototype of that we then went to schools with and asked them. Actually, even before the prototype, we actually only designed it. We didn't even build it. We just designed it and went to school and sat down with them and said, this is what we're proposing. Would this solve your problems? Would you be willing to pay for it and so on? And if so, can we sign an agreement that as soon as we build it, you will be the first to implement it? And we got 3 signups for that. Then we started building it. The MVP, of course, had tons of problems. Prototyping is actually one of the topics that you're going to be looking at, I guess, in the next couple of weeks. So you'll learn more about that. Tons of problems, but alhamdulillah, now we're in a phase where we have a stable product that is in demand, and we are managing to sell it to schools.